probably saw in the reporter, our speaker today is Danny Stiber. I was fortunate enough to hear Danny talk about the Waterloo Hawks a couple of years ago at another group, and it was fascinating, and I think you're going to find that as well. Danny's a local, born and raised here, graduated from Waterloo West High. Just sitting here talking to him, and his guest, Bill Conrad, who he brought, graduated from East High in the same year. It's just fascinating. There's a wealth of knowledge there. You're going to learn all about the Waterloo Hawks and maybe a little more as well. But he's got a lot up here. We're going to also pass around some information on Waterloo Hawks. If you haven't heard Danny, he's actually been on the radio on Gary Reimer's show. That's how this kind of started. It was, did you say it was 4 days before you and I beat Kansas, Danny, that you were on Gary's show? Yeah. So he was a guest on Gary's show just before you and I pulled off that big upset a few years ago, and so it's kind of grown from there. I think a lot of people in the area didn't know there was an NBA. That's a National Basketball Association team here in our town. So, Danny, if you would please come up, and then we're going to pass around some information. So please welcome Danny Stiber.
I kind of feel sorry for the ladies that are in attendance today, because over the weekend they probably said yesterday afternoon or last night, "You mean we got to watch another ball game on TV?" However, I guess over the last 4 years since I've been doing some service club presentations on the Waterloo Hawks, there have been a lot of women that heard about the Waterloo Hawks because of their grandparents. Their grandparents probably went to the game. How many here today are over age 83? 1, 2, how many are over age 75? Okay, those people that held up their hands might have paid the $2. Whoops! Might have paid the $2 to get into the Hippodrome to see the Waterloo Hawks. Now, in regards to the information that you are taking out of the envelope, I would prefer that you fold it back up, put it back in the envelope, and look at it when you get back to the office or at home. What I've reproduced for you is a 3-page copy of what was in the Des Moines Register in 2006 about the history of the Waterloo Hawks. And because it's so big, you'll bump your neighbor in the face if you start reading it. In order to give you some history about the Hawks, I better put on my Waterloo Hawks ball cap. Okay, because that brings back the memories. And if I don't remember it all, I have Bill Conrad to help me. He used to go to the games just like I did. My history with the Waterloo Hawks started when Gene Osborne, who was the announcer for KXEL, that did the East-West basketball games. He happened to give me a ride home one night during the blizzard, and he said, "Come on out to the Hippodrome next week and help me with the Waterloo Hawks." I said, "Who are they?" And then he proceeded to tell me, and he said, "I want you to keep the scorebook." So I kept the scorebook every game. I got to get some scoring stats at the halftime. And anytime any of the ball players were being interviewed at Friedel's Cafe, Gene would always have me there with a clipboard and paper and pen because we had no tape recorders. I was the tape recorder. I had to write down all the answers. And that's really my experience back in 1949-50. In regards to pro basketball started in the 1920s. And there was a club, and I'm sure it was a social club, in New York City by the name of the New York Renaissance Club. And they had a basketball team, they called them the Wrens. And in 1928, the Wrens played 88 games on the road, and they won them all. And that was the start of professional basketball. In fact, the starting 5 ball players for the New York Reds are currently in the National Basketball Hall of Fame. That's how good they were. Over the years, they won 2,400 games and lost 400. So they were pretty predominant at that time. In 1926, the American Basketball League started, the ABL. In 1930-31, the Harlem Globetrotters started. And if any of you remember Vi Norman, Waterloo, Vi Norman lives in Minneapolis. I got to talk to him on the phone a year ago. And he played in Waterloo with the Harlem Globetrotters back in the late 30s. And then he was a trainer sometime during Waterloo's 4 years of professional basketball, and a great friend. In 1946, the Basketball Association of America was formed. That was called the BAA, and it had 11 teams. Also that year, 1946, the National Basketball League was formed, and it had 11 teams, including Waterloo. In fact, in the NBL, there was Rochester, Fort Wayne, Toledo, Moline, Oshkosh, Sheboygan, Anderson, Indiana, Syracuse, Youngstown, Indianapolis, and Waterloo. That was the first year that Waterloo had a professional team, and they were called the Pearl Hawks, the Waterloo Pearl Hawks. The next year, 1947, the Professional Basketball League of America was started, including Waterloo. And I think Waterloo played 6 games. I think they won 1, lost 5, and the league was folded before Thanksgiving Day. So it was a real short season. You'll read about that in the article that I've given you to take home. So during the summer of 1947, some people here in Waterloo and headed up by Pinky George, the entrepreneur from Des Moines, who originally grew up in Cedar Falls, decided to have another team another year. And so in 1948, they went into the National Basketball League. Money was raised to reassemble, and the season was short, and so they ended up waiting until 1949 season. And the 49 season, the BAA and the NBL was combined to now become the NBA, National Basketball Association of America. Well, that was the first year. And you can win a free cup of coffee or a free pop with anybody after you walk out of this building, as long as they aren't my age. Because if they're my age, 83, they went to the games. If they're younger than that, you can just simply say, what city in Iowa is the only town in Iowa to ever be in the NBA? They don't have a clue. In fact, up at the Burger King in Waverly, there was a young man sitting there with some friends, and he was going to look over Wartburg College because he wanted to play ball at Wartburg maybe. And I said, what town in Iowa was there ever an NBA team? And he said, well, Independence. And I said, why would you select Independence? He said, well, my grandfather lives there. He didn't have a clue. I said, okay, now when you go home to Minneapolis, bet your dad $10 that he can't tell you what town in Iowa was ever in the NBA. And he says, well, he knows all about the NBA. I said, well, ask him anyway. So he did. And then he called me about 4 or 5 days later. And he said, I'm sure glad you gave me that information because I got $20 off of that. And I said, how'd you do that? He said, well, I bet my dad $10, and my dad says, oh, go on, get out of here. There's never been an NBA team in Iowa, and I'll bet you, I'll give you $20 if there was. And the kid says, okay, here. He went on his smartphone, he plugged in Waterloo Hawks 1949, and all the history came up. His dad says, oh my God, you finally got me. So anyway, 1949-50, first year of the NBA in Waterloo, Iowa. And if you hear me make a comment in the next 20 minutes about the Hippodrome, I'm talking about McElroy Auditorium. You probably don't realize this, but until I tell you, but the Hippodrome is the oldest continuous entertainment venue in the United States. All the other venues have either been changed, tore down, burned, etc. It's still standing, and they still have entertainment, so it still has that record. In 1949-50, there were 17 teams in the NBA. Very quickly, Sheboygan, New York, Washington, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Boston, Minneapolis, Rochester, Chicago, Fort Wayne, St. Louis, Indianapolis, Anderson, Indiana, Tri-City Blackhawks, Sheboygan Redskins, and the Waterloo Hawks and the Denver Nuggets. Waterloo was in the Western Division, and the team that was ahead of the standings all year long in our division was the Indianapolis Olympians. Why were they called the Olympians? Well, it's because in 1948, the Kentucky basketball team, probably every bit as good as the one that we're going to see win the NCAA this year, because they were all big and bruisers and quick. They won the NCAA. In fact, they won it 2 years in a row. And they had a player by the name of Ralph Beard, guard. Alex Rosa was the center. Wawa Jones was on that team. Cliff Parker was on that team. They were all Americans. And they were selected to play in the 1948 Olympics, representing the United States. They won 12 games, and they won the gold medal. Came back to Indianapolis, and the city folks said, well, we got enough money to have you stay and stick around and play as the Indianapolis Olympians. And they did. They had a very memorable game, which you'll read about in your literature, on Christmas Day, 1949. They were tied with Waterloo 84-84 with 58 seconds to go. Back then we didn't have three-point shots. But what we did have was this little minute ruling in the rule book that said that if I brought 7 players to the game and 3 of them fall out, instead of playing with 4 to finish the game, you can bring one of those players back into the game, but if he made a foul, then we got to shoot 2 shots, plus we got the ball out of bounds. Well, that's what happened with Indianapolis. They had 6 players foul out. So some of them got to come back into play, and in that last 58 seconds, and more fouls were racked up, more foul shots were taken. In fact, there were 90 fouls called in that game. The Waterloo Hawks shot 45 free throws. You know, that's just unheard of, even in pros today. Well, anyway, Waterloo won, 97-94, and that was quite interesting from another standpoint too, because when the game ended and it was going to go into overtime, half of the 4,500 people, believe it or not, 4,500 people in that auditorium. We had 3 games that year where we put 7,000 people in there. They were hanging from the rafters. And anyway, 4,500 people that night, half of them had gone out to the parking lot. It was snowing, they wanted to get the heck out of there. Well, they got out in the car and they started listening to Gene Osborne on the game, and they turned around and come back in. And so Gene's doing a couple of commercials, and he pokes me with his arm to look down to the east end and hear that little door. People were trying to get through there, knocking each other over, so they opened up the big cattle door to let those people back in, so they could see the next 5-minute overtime, and Waterloo won that game. That was a memorable game. Another one was when Syracuse came to town, and their record was 27-4, and Waterloo was like maybe 9-23 or something, and Waterloo beat them here by 7 or 8 points. And the next day in headlines on the sports pages across the United States, Waterloo beat Syracuse. That was really a big thing. Our center on our team was Harry Wyckoff. Harry was a two-time All-American at St. John's University in New York City. And he was 6'11". He was a good ball player. He wasn't a George Mikan, of course, but he was a good ball player. And whenever Waterloo went to New York City to play in Madison Square Garden decided that they couldn't have on the marquee New York Knicks versus Waterloo Hawks tonight at 8 p.m. They had to change that in order to get more people to come to the game. So it would read New York Knicks versus Harry Wyckoff, 8 p.m. And then they would get 5,000 people. Because people in New York City didn't even know what a Waterloo Hawk was or where they were, So a lot of those things, at the start of that first season was really pretty cool. Waterloo ended up with 19 wins and 43 losses. And at the end of the season, there was a meeting in Chicago with Morris Potloff, the director of the NBA, and he got up and he said to the 17 club owners and managers, two things, good and bad. The good thing is we're going to have a second season. The bad thing is Waterloo, Iowa, Sheboygan, Wisconsin, and Anderson, Indiana, and the Denver Nuggets have decided not to be with us. Of course, Chris Marsall, who was president of the Waterloo Ball Club at that time, got up and said, whoa, wait a minute, we have plenty of money, we don't want that wish at all. Well, the bigger cities had decided that those towns were not too easy to get to by train, because they didn't fly, they didn't ride buses, they rode trains. And so we were kicked out of the NBA. So just imagine, if you would, what Waterloo would be like today had the NBA experience continued. We'd be the Green Bay of Iowa, home in basketball. Back to some of the other trivial things. George Mikan had a salary of $30,000 that first year. That turns out to be $483 a game. Now, last year, Kobe Bryant, his salary was $25,244,000. He made $407,000 a game. Quite a bit of difference there. And when we're talking about that salary, Johnny Orr was a rookie on our team that year. He scored 52 points in 14 games, and we got him from the St. Louis Bombers. Johnny went to Beloit College and also the University of Illinois. He went down to St. Louis. He played for 2 weeks, and they cut him, told him to go to Waterloo because Waterloo needed another 1 or 2 ball players. So he came up to Waterloo, he went out to the Hippodrome, and he worked out. And they signed him to a $3,500 contract. And he went to the Russell Lanston Hotel to stay that night because that's where the single players were staying until they could get a room in a boarding house. And the next morning after he had breakfast, he went over to the shoe shine guy to have him shine his shoes. And the shoe shine man was shining the shoes, and he says, what are you, a salesman for Rass or for John Deere? And Johnny says, no, I'm here to play ball with the Waterloo Hawks. And the guy said, well, how's it going? I said, okay. Johnny says, well, I don't know how I'm going to be able to live on $3,500. He didn't know that the highest paid John Deere factory worker at that time was $3,200. So he was furious about his contract, and he said, the place smells like a barn. Oh yeah, they have rodeos there. There's rust in the water, and the towels are too small. And there's spots on the floor where you bounce the ball and it goes that way instead of back up. Bill and I knew that because when we played ball out there, that's what happened. Coach Stourbridge always told me what spots to miss. And I bounced the ball there. Anyway, Johnny's telling the shoe shine man all this. So Johnny goes out that afternoon to 4 o'clock practice at the Hippodrome, and Chris Monticello, the president of the club, calls him over the sidelines and says, Johnny, what's this I hear? You don't like your money, you don't like the towels, you don't like the smell in the barn, you don't like the water. What's going on? You haven't even played 1 minute in your first game yet. Johnny says, how do you know that? And Chris says, well, the shoe shine man down at Russell Lamson happens to be one of the 355 people that put up the money for this team. So guess what? A year ago, when Gary Reinhold had me on his radio show on Press Row, Gary told me that somebody was going to call in at 5:30, but he wouldn't tell me who. And he had called Johnny Orr down in Florida and asked Johnny to call in at 5:30. So Johnny called in, and I reminded him about that, and he says, "Do you remember that?" And I said, "Well, yes, I'm almost as old as you are." Johnny really liked Waterloo. Incidentally, that Indianapolis Olympic team, Alex Rosa and Ralph Beard were all league 2 years in a row. The third year, which would have been the start of 1951-52, they were banned for life from the NBA. And they were banned for life because in 1947, 1948, while playing for the University of Kentucky, they were shaving points. A missed free throw, a missed shot, a pass over the head of somebody going down on a fast break. And it took the NCAA 4 years to figure that out, and so they were banned for life. In fact, Ralph Beard just died here a couple of years ago, and Alex Rosa died about 3 years ago. They would have had long time careers had they not done what they did. You know, and that brings up another little point about referees. We had some of the best referees because they were crowd pleasers. What the referees did back then, they'd be fined today or they'd be fired. Johnny Nucatola, gotta get that right, Italian, and he would say, "No way, Billy Boy, that's a foul on you. You cannot hold a shirt like that." And of course the crowd loved it, you know, they just all liked all that. There was a referee by the name of Gabby Ekman. We called him Choo Choo because he rode the trains all the time. He was a train nut. And Choo Choo Ekman had a loud voice, and he was very demonstrative. He would hold his shirt, pull on his shirt if you were doing that. He would jump and kick his legs like he was hopscotching to show that the player did traveling, you know, and he'd do all kinds of different things. Well, if you read anything about George Mikan in any magazines or books, there's a situation where Minneapolis were playing in Baltimore against the Baltimore Bullets, and Charlie Choo Choo Eichmann was the referee, and George Mikan went over to him before the game, and he says, "Charlie, I want you to follow me out early." And Charlie says, "Why would you want me to do that?" And George says, "Well, because I want to go to Mass. And that's not too far from here in the stadium, so follow me out early." So in the first quarter, in the first 30 minutes, George gets a foul, and he's upset. And he goes over to Charlie and says, "You don't have to start so soon." And Charlie says, "Okay, George, tell you what, I won't call any more fouls on you the rest of the night." And George says, oh, don't do that, I'll miss Mass." So when he gets his sixth foul, which is in the middle of the fourth quarter, George walks over to Charlie Eichmann and says, "Where's the church?" And Choo Choo Eichmann says, "Well, you know, if you go down here about 3 blocks, another 2.5, go down the alley, and it's right there." And because he was pointing like that, all 10,000 people in Baltimore at the game thought that George was being rejected out of the game. Let's see, let's go back to New Year's Eve. Gene Osborne called me about 11 o'clock that morning, and he said, be down at Friedel's Cafe this afternoon at 3 o'clock because he was going to interview a Minneapolis Laker player. And I said, who's that going to be? And he says, well, I'm not going to tell you. So I got down there, and Gene and I were sitting at a table, and here comes George Mikan through the door. It's all 6'11" of them. He had to duck to get in. And he came over and he sat down with us, and Gene starts asking him questions. And I'm supposed to do the answers. And George ordered a T-bone steak dinner with all the trimmings. And he ate that, and the waitress came over and said, would you like to have some dessert? And George says, yeah, I would. What I want you to do, I want you to go out in the kitchen, and I want you to tell the chef to fry me another 16-ounce T-bone. I don't want anything else, just another T-bone. So he ate 2 T-bones, one full dinner, and 5 hours later, out at the Hippodrome, he scored 35 points. They beat Waterloo 86-68, and at 35 points at the Hippodrome is still a record on that floor today. Nobody's ever scored more points than that up till today. Who else? Claude Overton. This was during the next season, 1950-51. He was an All-American at Northeast Oklahoma. And he was playing with the Harlem Globetrotters, other team, the Washington Nationals. And they were playing in Berlin. And they had an outdoor stadium, soccer stadium, that seated 70,000 people. And they had that filled for the Harlem Globetrotters versus the Washington Nationals. And Claude did a very unthinkable thing, and it got him fired. He scored 50 points against the Globetrotters. You're not supposed to do that. So now when they have the famous Bruce Stadium, anyway, he got fired. And so I'm at the YMCA here in Waterloo, we're shooting baskets. And here's this guy, Claude Overton, shooting baskets. And he says, do you want to play some one-on-one? And I said, I don't know who you are, but I don't think I'm up to it. Because he was drilling everything. So what we did is we shot shots around the perimeters, and we played a game of 21. And he beat me. And I said, what are you, a salesman? Because there were salesmen that came to town for John Deere, and they'd go to the YMCA and work out. That's why I asked him that. He said, no, he says, I'm here to play for the Waterloo Hawks. And I said, well, what college did you go to? And he told me the story, that he did the unthinkable thing. He scored 50 points against the Globetrotters. Dick Dickey, All-American at North Carolina State. And he was on a team from Kansas City. That was in the second year that Waterloo had a pro team. And he was at the end of the court, and they were going to, the horn blew because they were going to muster up and start the game. And he threw the ball the full length of the court. And of course, he didn't make it. And I said to him, let me see you make one of those during the game. He said, if I get a chance, kid, I'll try. Well, guess what? During the game, and it was like 10 seconds to go at the end of the first half, he gets the ball on the free throw lane, and he heaves it, and it goes right through. And he walks over then to the sideline where Gene Osborne and I were doing the broadcast, and he looks down at me and he says, is that the way you want it, kid? You know, when we did out-of-town games, my classmates thought that I traveled with Gene Osborne to these games out of town. We didn't go anywhere. We were in the KWWL building doing the games by Western Union Telegraph. So there was a guy that was supposed to have knowledge of the game, and he was supposed to be typing the game in on a ticker tape. And the ticker tape came through a glue gun like this, and when it came out at the end, I put it on paper for Gene, and he always had about 3 things he wanted me to do. Make sure the score was right, make sure we only have 5 players in the game, and have 11 sheets ahead. Well, one night we got down to where there was only 3 sheets left, and he was getting concerned because the machine had shut down. That's because we were playing in Sheboygan, and it was the middle of a snowstorm, and the electricity went out. And so what Gene Osborne was doing was he was making up. Just like Ronald Reagan did when he was on WHO. And so Gene had this ball player from Waterloo on the floor scuffling to kill time. And boy, he's got a bruise on his nose. And so the team came back to Waterloo, and when this player's girlfriend, who was the new West High English teacher, went down to pick him up, she said, "You better put a Band-Aid on your nose because I listened to the game and Gene Osborne had you in a fight on the floor." And he said, "Really?" So they got to her house and she put the Band-Aid over his nose. And 2 days later, out at the Hippodrome for practice, Gene and I were there because we were going to interview a ball player. And this guy walked over to Gene and said, "Mr. Osborne, have I got that Band-Aid in the right place?" Gene looked up at him and said, "Oh my goodness. Who do you know that listens to the game?" He says, "The English teacher at West High. Never misses one." So now that you know all that, you will enjoy reading what you have in your packet because it gives you the complete history of the Waterloo Hawks.
Danny, thank you for a wonderful program, very interesting. We all enjoyed those stories about the Waterloo Hawks and your association with them. For coming today, we've got a little bracelet for you or a loved one. It's made out of wallpaper by children in Nicaragua where we help out with our shoebox project. Steve.
Yeah.
And we just want to thank you for coming. And
a little picture.
Mason wants to get a picture.
Picture easy.
Oh, okay.